Okay. I'd like to welcome all members and officers to today's Cleaner Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting. Just to confirm, as a council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language in our public meetings. I have not received notice that members or invited attendees wish to use Welsh today, therefore the meeting will be conducted in English only. May I remind you that this meeting is being webcast, therefore can I ask that you turn off, silence your mobile phones and ensure you speak clearly into your microphones. It might help if we don't have the mobile phones on display. For your information, there are no planned fire drills today, but in case of a fire alarm sounding, please follow the signs to the exit. And I know everyone's familiar with the exit. Can I also remind all members to sign the attendance register and confirm if any apologies have been received for this meeting? Okay, we'll move on to item 2 of the agenda. Item 2 of the agenda, the declarations of interest. Oh, sorry.
No worries. I've received apologies from Councillor Bevan, Councillor Davis, Councillor Evans and Councillor James.
Thank you, Rachel. Sorry about that. Okay, we'll move on to item 2 of the agenda, declarations of interest. We've already received legal advice that this is a council-wide policy, so if we're involved in any of these community homes in an individual capacity, the advice we've had, we don't need to declare an interest. I understand Councillor Ashley may have an interest regarding his involvement with the Community Council, so I suggest you mark that on the register. I don't think anyone else has got any interests. Okay, we'll move straight on to...
can I ask you why you've got to declare?
Sorry.
Why do community councillors have to declare?
No, it's not that. It's just my involvement with that one particular body.
I don't think there's an interest, but we're just playing safe that he's in case.
Because I thought I might have to declare an interest.
You're not on that body.
Because,
on that.
Oh, that's okay then.
Yeah.
Okay.
The rest of it.
So we need to stick to the mics. Okay, we'll move on then to item 3 of the agenda, the minutes of the meetings held on the 23rd of January 2019. Please can I ask members to scan through the minutes for accuracy and confirm that the minutes are an accurate account of the meeting. So if we quickly go through the minute page by page, page 3, page 4, 5, 6, I'm going through this rather quickly, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, this was a long meeting, 14, 15.
I move those as an accurate...
Thank you. Is that seconded? Okay, thank you. The minutes are agreed. So we move on then to item 4 on the agenda, the action sheet. Please could Rachel update members on any actions outstanding?
There's 2 updates to the action sheet, however the rest remain outstanding and will be completed by the next meeting.
Any queries on the actions? No? Okay, we'll move on. The next item now is the substantive item on today's agenda, which is the development of a policy on council-owned community facilities, including halls and sports grounds. So, Rachel, can we invite the officers and the executive members into the room, please? So we'll just pause for a moment while they come. Wait for everyone to take a seat, now we'll do introductions. I'll just let everyone settle down a minute. I'm just going to wait for Rachel to come back because she's taking the minutes. Okay, so I'd like to welcome the officers, invitees and executive members. Now, I've got a list, but there's 6 of you here, so there's one of you I'm not sure who it is, but we'll get to that in a minute. I'd like to welcome Councillor David Daniels, the executive member for Communities, Housing and Anti-Poverty. Councillor Fiona Cross, the executive member for the Environment. Andrew Rowlands, Community Project Manager. Which one's Andrew? That's Andrew, just checking who it is. Mark Planiers, Team Leader Access, that's you, Mark, right? And Andrew, who's our old favourite for these meetings. And I'm afraid I don't know the lady.
I'm Joanna, I'm in Mark's team, so I'm the Community Environment Officer. Oh, thank you.
Do you want to say that again? Just
yeah, I'm Joanna Giatra. I'm the Community Environment Officer within Andrew and Mark's team.
Right, you're very welcome, Joanna.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the committee are aware that this report covers the portfolio of both the executive members. So firstly, can I ask both members if they'd like to say a few words to introduce the report or explain how the report fits into their role? So we start with Fiona, ladies first.
Thank you. I'm going to be very brief. It is essentially to have a policy that ensures fair, open and transparent leasing of our halls and our sports fields, so that just so we're specific as to what the actual outcome is today. So we really want your feedback on how we could improve this policy. The current system as it stands is rather informal. It's a list that's held by an officer, which means that it's not as able for the community to understand the process on how to actually apply. And I'm sure many of you have had contact from different organisations, football fields, demand clubs as they grow, as to, is there a field available and there's a waiting list. So it's just to ensure that those organisations and individuals have a clear understanding of how they can apply. There's other things to consider in this, though, as well, is that, for example, is it appropriate that we ask these sports clubs or community halls to ensure that activities for both male and female, particularly with sports fields, because they're predominantly male-led activities, but is that something that we should consider? And also our responsibility in terms of biodiversity, which is something that, as we know, with our biodiversity resilience plan, is something that belongs to all of us, and we all have a responsibility to ensure. So that's me in a nutshell.
Daniels?
In being frank, I think probably the majority of the report and the policy falls into Fiona's world of things. However, Andrew Rowlands is here, and I'm the exec member who's responsible for the management of the halls. So I'm on hand basically to pitch in on any questions you have around the management of the halls, and I'm quite interested in the committee's view on the future direction of the halls. So that's my capacity here. Basically, anything that isn't answered by everyone else, I'll try and answer.
Okay, thank you both for those opening remarks. Obviously, we had a pre-scrutiny meeting on Monday, and we've formulated a list of questions that we wish to raise. It's up to the group of you who answers. We'll just play it by ear, I think. So I think we go straight into the questions. The first question's on risks. Norman, do you want to start off, please?
How do you manage and monitor the risk currently in place around health and safety legislation if the community premises aren't adequately managed? And how do you think this new policy will mitigate that risk?
Chair, would it be possible to get a copy of the questions just in front of us now, just so we can catch them all?
Right, I'll read it out. How do you manage and monitor the risks currently in place around health and safety legislation if the community premises aren't adequately managed? And how do you think this new policy will mitigate that risk?
Norman, to you. Who's dealing with that one?
Well, is that okay? Yeah. Here we go, we're on. Okay, thank you for your question. In terms of the risk, my post came into play a couple of years ago to mitigate those risks which were identified. So, in terms of monitoring the risks in a community building, we have provided them with, in consultation with our health and safety team, we've identified core training that we should provide to the committee, the voluntary committees running the building on our behalf. And we have requested that they attend and complete that training so they've got the necessary skills and awareness to be able to manage those premises effectively. And what we do then on a monthly basis, our team go out and visit each premises manager at the venue to make sure they are covering all the necessary premises management tasks on a monthly basis, and in accordance to the health and safety laws around it, to make sure that not only them as the premises managers are covered, but in terms of as landlords ourselves, we're covered in providing the correct level of support then. And in terms of the policy itself, it is included in the policy that the ongoing support and training will be met through our team.
Thank you. Anyone got a follow-up on that one? Norma?
You say the managers. Do you mean the committees who run the halls, or is there a specific manager?
A bit of both. So we have, with the management agreement, we've gone out and met with all of the committees and the chairs of the committees to identify a premises manager. So in some halls, a separately employed caretaker. Other halls is kind of one person wears all of those hats. So we kind of liaise with that person. Whoever's on site completing those health and safety tasks, we meet with them on a monthly basis to make sure that they've got everything they need from us to make sure they can run the premises effectively.
Stuart?
Who's responsible for health and safety if you've got a management committee?
In terms of the management of health and safety, I believe it lies within our remit to corporate health and safety. So our corporate health and safety are on hand to advise and support where needed. In terms of insurances, the actual individual committees are responsible for having their own insurances in place for public liability employers. And thank you.
Shall I say that again? Because my understanding of voluntary management committees, I thought, was if you have a voluntary management committee, every member of that management committee should be responsible. Is that not correct?
I'll have to consult with the health and safety on that because I'm not entirely sure.
I mean, I'm at another meeting where you're suggesting TVA be involved with this activity, and if you look at their advisory stuff from WCBA, I'm only saying that because you're suggesting we look at that, and if you look at WCBA's advisory on the subject, it suggests if you've got a voluntary management committee, whether it's charitable or not doesn't really matter, corporately, bear in mind I've done training with the CAB on this subject, and their advice on the said subject as well is that, and any other workplace, all members of staff or a executive committee or anything, everybody is advisable. I only asked you that question. I'm making a point, because what I worry about is if you've got members of the management committee and some are more active than others, they are corporate involved. I only say that because I'm making that observation.
I think on that point, Stuart, we'll let the officer consider that, and he can respond to the committee. We'll deal with that issue.
Yeah, but the issue I picked up.
Thank you. Norma?
You mentioned insurance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does anybody check the insurance policies to see if they're adequate? Because, I mean, public liability is really important, as well as having insurance for the building and, you know, that sort of thing. So does anybody actually check it?
Yes.
Yeah, from the purposes of the sports facilities, the fact that public liability would be included in the heads of terms, and we would require a certificate showing that they have got that insurance cover.
And with the halls, we do request that they have adequate levels of public liability and contents insurance. In terms of the level that's covered, it's not checked by ourselves, it's deemed by them what's necessary for their activities and what they've got in place there.
Simple little question here, because this has been raised as well. Is this best value for money, and we helping them with that?
Helping them in terms of insurances?
Yeah, best value for money.
Yeah, so we work with TVA to support the community halls. It has been brought to our attention on a couple of other occasions in terms of potential savings they could make as a whole by outsourcing or looking and shopping around, as we all do individually at home, for the best insurance offer. And we have kind of circulated via TVA other options out there to try and bring the cost down for them.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. With the community halls then, and you have a management committee in there, and we talk about risks and health and safety. What happens when the management committee fail and the risks to the hall then? What happens to the hall? When would you come in on that? Because there are lots of halls we've got, and I'm sure there's some will be failing. So how do you look at it, and when would you go in?
Ron, we're going to pick that question up.
Yeah.
It's further down. So,
oh, right. That's right.
You can have the question, Ron, but we'll store that.
That's it's in there. Yeah, carry on. Good.
Okay. Can we move on to the question on current arrangements? Ron, do you want to ask that one, please?
What would be your preferred option leases, licences of management agreement, and why?
Can I take this one?
Yes.
Yes.
So if I talk about leases and licences first, perhaps Andrew can talk about management arrangements because they're more applicable to the community halls. But in the papers you got, I think it's on page 54, within the actual draft policy, there's a title there, the legal basis of use, which explains this really. A lease will give a group the exclusive right to use the property for the duration of the lease, subject to the group providing written acceptance of the heads of terms, of course. A lease can run for any period, commonly from 1 year up to 20 years, but you could have, in theory, a lease for 99 years or more, perhaps. At the end of the lease, the building or the property would return to the council control. So a licence is much more flexible arrangement for shorter durations, so it doesn't give exclusive rights to the land, and it can tend to be more of a sort of a temporary arrangement and is more flexible. So that's the main difference really. We have got instances where there are arrangements on land that's owned by other parties, and they tend to be under a licence rather than a lease because we don't own the property.
Can I come in as well? And I think that's one of the questions that we would be asking you as well, is that it's very much about whether it's short-term or long-term. I mean, what if, say, in particular with a football field, that a group take on that field, but then they're not using it as much. So we're not then encouraging more of the community to use that facility, and it's not encouraging an active community. So it's those sort of questions that I would really like to have feedback from yourselves. What is it, throwing it back at you really, what is it that you would want? Is it short-term or long-term leases, or is it assess as we go along and dependent on the group, how sustainable it is, how old it might be?
Fiona, we're going to put that question back to you in a minute. So, no, don't worry. Stuart, did you want to come in?
Well, yes, that the legal requirement and the conditions there within, I'm allowed to talk on this particular question, that is actually a worry and a complaint over the last few years that people had, obviously, with regards to fences, and I mean, you've heard Andrew's nodding quite well on this one. I think he knows my view on the subject. And I think you've raised it really well there. Access is obviously the issue. Oh, we've got a question on access. In case I bounce in there, I'll leave it off. It's what instrument you want to use on that, and leave it like that. Obviously, these instruments we can determine as a council, can't we? And I think that's very important. Yeah.
Essentially what I would like from this
I'm
committee.
waiting for his bounce back in question. I wasn't at the pre-op.
There's also the issue as well that, you know, what if there's a group that isn't as sustainable? Perhaps it was when it started, and it's done really well for a couple of years, but then it has problems, people move on and whatnot. So then again, that question comes in, how effective is the short-term and the long-term leases?
We've got an issue on that later on in the piece. Any more questions on this one? If not, we'll move on then to joint work in collaboration. Dave, do you want to ask the next question, please? Is this the one by working together?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for that, Chair. By working together across two service areas to carry out this review, what benefits or difficulties have you encountered?
I think that if we think about the Wellbeing for Future Generations Act, it's encouraging us to work much more collaboratively in a more integrated way across the organisation, and I think there's efficiencies in doing that. And a good example would be if these were separate policies, there may be two separate exec members looking at it, two separate scrutiny meetings, and I think it's beneficial because they are similar things. It's all about leasing and licensing. Then it becomes encompassed into a single policy, and we work together across the various departments.
I'm very keen to encourage that we don't work in silos. So I see this as a benefit. It's a joint subject that helps relationships between employees, and so that's beneficial to us all, I hope.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Alan, do you want to ask that one, please?
Thank you, Chair. Have you considered other local authorities deal with these issues to see if there are any benefits that we can derive from their experience?
There is a forum of a Green Spaces group across many of the local authorities, and many local authorities have gone down this route of leasing facilities and have experienced different problems. And so, all I can say is that we link up with the other local authorities on that basis.
Yeah, I just wonder if you can demonstrate what benefits we've received from that, then what's influenced this policy from that?
I think it's useful to get an understanding of some of the difficulties that some of the other organisations have had on some of these. Sometimes, facilities have been leased out and then the organisations have folded and they've had to be taken back in and managed again by the council. Specifically, I don't think we have based this approach on any experience from the other local authorities. Yeah.
There's two things that come to mind here. One is obviously places like Swansea, who were the kind of market leader in Wales. I make that question because having gone to the same conferences you might have done, looked at their presentations, they certainly looked on innovative land usage, and I suspect they've gone down the lines of doing halls and sports grounds. The other thing is that I would argue that possibly community halls in Cwmbran is somewhat, it's not unique, because Cardiff had the same setup of community halls as well. It might be worth looking at Cardiff. And then looking a little away, bearing in mind that we are a new town in Cwmbran, some of the stuff that happened elsewhere in the borough, might be worth looking at the use of community halls and how we use it. Because I'm personally not happy about our use of community halls. It's so led by the halls and not by the use of the halls. It's a different thing. What we looked at in terms of library use is about the use of the resources as a commons. And if you look in England, there's a lot of stuff there. It's not use of the building, not as, and I suspect Dave has something to say about what I'm going to say here, the use of the commons what happens in the building, not the building itself, because they're two different things. And if you look at Commons, there's a lot of work being done in England by a charity called Locality, well worth looking at. And you see, the one thing that's not included in this discussion, which it ought to be, and you're doing a study into it at the moment, is all the ground we got, not just the sports pitches and the community halls. Because I suspect if we went down the Incredible Weatherwall and the rest of it, which we've tried in the past, we ought to be looking at leasing them out as well.
So we are looking at the
I'm just, the thing that's missing from this equation is that. And I think Andrew might...
Andrew.
Yeah.
So, perhaps it could be a request from the committee that we do look at experience elsewhere and come back with some feedback on that.
I'm suggesting we look at the experience of the charity Locality in England. We haven't got a direct equivalent in Wales.
You've made that point well, Stuart. We'll move on in a second, and the next question is rather long, so I'll ask it. There's just one thing I'll just draw to the attention of the officers. Councillor Parish has noted that there was one little error on one of the tables with the pitches. Jarrett's Field New Inn, it's 3 rugby pitches and 1 football pitch. Just we need to correct that. I'm just putting that on the record, Norma, as you raised it with me.
Thank you, Chair.
Brilliant. The next question I'll ask, because I'm not going to pick on one of my members to raise it, it's a long one, and Fiona is really going back to the question you were trying to ask us, but we're going to ask you it first. If the Council considers the allocation of short-term licences rather than the long-term leases where appropriate as a way of providing for the needs of a wider range of groups, what will the pros and cons of this be, and how can you be sure you're balancing short-term needs with long-term needs? This is under the equality and diversity sort of umbrella.
No, I think I have kind of put the risks out there. My concern is that I really want to see a more active community, but I want to see girls and boys, men and women, having fair access to these opportunities. But I also want to ensure that those fields or community halls are being managed by appropriate organisations or groups that are sustainable. And we know that changes. That is just the nature of voluntary work. A lot of volunteers tend to organise the football and the football clubs and the halls. So it's always having the opportunity to reassess, I think, is useful. But I'm not telling you, I'm just saying my concerns. I want your feedback.
We'll get our feedback, don't worry, but Stuart, you want to come in?
I raised in yesterday's council, and I think possibly others did, that we brought up our equality plan, and I think that's essential. Anybody that uses our pitches and community halls has to go by our equality plan, and I'd like to see that built in.
It is noted in the report under well-being, our well-being outcomes. So there's a number of points on there. Sorry, I don't know what page it's on. I'm making notes as we go through.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is there.
Issue that Mark knows well from other courses. I mean, allotments being the other one, because we've had issues, and I think it's really a very reasonable ask on your part, to be quite honest. It should be written to everything we do.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, it's still going on about equality and about the pitches. Yeah. And have we ever come across a situation where we can't fulfil it? All right, say ladies hockey teams want to use a pitch. Have we had that situation where other gender have come along wanting to use our pitches then?
I don't think that's necessarily the issue, because ultimately it is a male-dominated area. Most of them are football pitches, some of them are rugby, and it just tends to be boys. But what I'm suggesting is that, is it part of our licensing? Most, I said most, I didn't say all. Is it something that we'd want to put in the policy that we encourage or we nudge groups to is that part of how we would assess criteria-wise as to giving out that pitch? Would it be something that we'd say, well, do you have any girls' divisions, even if it's the smallest? You know, that's the sort of language I'm going down the road of.
That's what I'm coming at. I mean, do we put it in there? Have we ever had anybody come along to say, well, we want a pitch for our hockey teams or whatever, or ladies' football teams? Yeah, that's what. Yeah, ladies football and other things. Hang on, Stu. I don't know if there's any hockey teams around here. I mean, we see it's all male orientated, we know, but there are ladies football teams on television and all now. So again, if you're leasing to a football team, you could have incorporated in that in conditions that if there's a ladies football team on a sharing basis as well.
Usually they'll be within the team itself. So it's like there'll be a football team that'll start, and I know this from direct experience in my own area, and then the demand grows for the girls and even mixed teams, and that's great. And that's all I'm saying is it something that we would then say, well, that would have a higher weight, or that we would find that more desirable, that as long as they're showing an interest in supporting both genders, then that's great.
I think we should automatically go in there to leave it open. As part of the report that we've talked about it, and as you said, there's mixed teams and one builds on another, but there could be somebody come along, their own ladies team have nothing to do with any male team at all. So if it's in the report, it just covers it, doesn't it?
I think as long as it represents both genders fairly, you know, not that a female team would have a dominant position in being allocated. Yeah.
3 members now want to speak, so it's Stuart, then it's Alan, and then it's Norma.
One of the concerns I had about allocation of sports pitches was, and we faced little battles on this, there are little battles too, was a licence would be made to a sports team and you get this pitch locked down just to one, and there's some examples I know of, not necessarily in my ward, of one team exclusively using it on a Saturday and Sunday, and that's it. What Ron hit on, I think rather well, I thought, was that if they were a bit more generous about the use of the pool, and they took a line that some of our more established clubs are, where they've got a range of activities, not gender specific, because they can have a ladies, men, etc. And I hear what you're saying, Jonah, because you're a big champion for this stuff, and it has to be that it's champion across both genders, and that they have a range. And some of the more established clubs and some of the more established leagues in sports, it doesn't really matter which they are, get this principle, and you can see that it's happening in the major sports now. I think that principle, because it says in this report we don't have enough sports pitches. Yeah. And I think if we went down that line, we open it up. They've got to be more inclusive. I think that's the word we want. Inclusivity is what we need to be encouraging with this.
We'll pick that up in recommendations towards the end of the meeting. I'm going to just bring in the other 2 councillors first, and then I'll go back to the officers and the executive members. Alan next, please.
Thanks for the promotion, Chair. But anyway, this probably moves on to the next question as well, and it relates to flexibility, really. I'm wondering what we could actually engineer in the process to encourage the use of both 3G and 4G pitches on some of these properties, because that is one way of increasing usage on a smaller space for everyone, and is very inclusive, whatever gender, whoever wants to come along. I understand we've got a waiting list now for people who still want to use facilities. So is there something we can do to encourage? We don't have the finance that the council has £500,000 quid to spend on a 3G or 4G pitch, but some of these organisations can get access to funds and grow their own, and we've got a lack of 3 and 4G here. I just think, is there some way that we can do, something we can do via this policy to develop that?
Do you want to pick that point up before I bring Norma in?
Obviously, members will be aware of the current financial circumstances of the authority, but where there are opportunities through Section 106 agreements, then we are looking to develop the best facilities that we can in the right area. And that links into the assessment of open spaces that's currently going on as part of the development of the local development plan.
Can I? In addition to that, I'll declare an interest, because we are both Torfaen Leisure Trust trustees. There are other organisations such as Torfaen Leisure Trust that can manage some of these pitches. I mean, they manage their own as it is. It might be another part of the question, really, is how many of these do we want to lease out? How many do we want to have ourselves? We've got 2. Is it better with us, some of those pitches? Or is it better with another organisation being managed? I mean, these are the questions that could be asked.
come back in first.
Yes, just back on the same point. I'm talking about these organisations managing, not ourselves, not our self-development, but what could we do within the policy to facilitate them? I mean, maybe it's a rent-free period for a time if they can develop so many funds, just to think about how we could actually develop that. I think the rent would be a smaller one that we could maybe manage with somebody somewhere if they could, improve the use of that and increase the use of it. But I don't anticipate any capital spend going into that and doing anything like that. But it's just to help facilitate some of these clubs in being able to do so.
It is in the report that they get. There's a nominal fee that they don't spend. We don't ask for very much money anyway. We don't ask. It's like, what is it, £1 or something? It's really. So we are giving them as much help as we can in that sense.
Sorry, but I got a question a little later that might relate to that very topic.
When you wanted to come in?
Yeah, it's going back to the male-female thing. And do you give priority to the junior teams? Because that's when you see the male-female, because there's lots of little girls loving football now and even rugby. If they looked after at a very young level, then what's coming up later, whether they're male, female, mixed or whatever. It's really important that the junior teams get as much support as possible.
That could be a recommendation. The purpose of this policy is that there is no policy. So this is something, if you want to make as a recommendation that junior teams would, again, give it a higher weight, then that could be something that we would then go away and consider. So it's a really good point.
On a similar theme, do you want to ask the next question? Go on. Let's come back to you first, then you.
I just want to come back to you, Stuart, on your point. The other risk that we've got, your earlier point, is that what if, I think you were saying about inclusivity, yeah? So what if there's a football club or a rugby club that has a pitch, but as I said before, perhaps they're not using it as much. Again, another thing that might be something that we add weight to their application is if they're making sure that they are allowing other clubs to use that space. So that might be another thing you want to consider. Because it might not. It might be a case of it's my field, we're cutting the grass, we're doing the hedges, it's ours, we're not letting anybody else have any access to it. Yeah?
But that capacity to maybe manage is where somebody, either the Leisure Trust or the Borough, can help. That's the other. Something in the back of my mind. I was sat at a meeting the other day. I think it was Community Council. Somebody mentioned potential muggers, i.e., multi-use areas. I don't know what meeting I was at with that, but there are potential muggers all over the place that are not old tennis courts, is what they really are. It struck me, if we haven't got enough kickabout areas, those sort of places, maybe that's something else we could look at. The hard standing areas and some of the fields that are not being used as football pitch because not suitable, they're in my ward, a couple of them, they could be used as ancillary training areas without getting rid of. There's options there that are not necessarily full pitches. If we've got what I'm going to recommend, suggest that maybe the muggers is something, because somebody said there ought to be an area, and they were talking about basketball, which is not represented in a lot of things, and it was interesting they should say that. We don't have a lot of basketball areas, and we haven't got one, as far as I know, actually in proper. So it was something they were suggesting on that. I thought it was a really interesting suggestion.
Fiona, yeah.
Take on board your points. The only thing is this is about the licensing at the moment, the policy. So so that's something for future.
But that is another licensing issue where we're redoing parks at the moment, isn't it, Andrew?
That's about growing. It's about growing what we've got at the moment. This is about managing what we've got.
It's totally linked, isn't it?
Okay.
I just want to come up, whilst taking Nora's point about younger children and the rest of it, I just wanted to point out that younger children and younger people who have access via schools and colleges to a lot of open sports facilities as well as outside, whereas a lot of people of working age don't have that issue. So I don't think we need. I think we need to think about that when we develop the policy. That's all. But
I think we've already answered the next question on equality and diversity, so we'll move on to consultation. And Norma, you can ask that question, please.
Okay. Have you consulted with any of the current leaseholders during this review to get their views on what they think is required of the policy?
So, not specifically to the policy, but there's a wider consultation ongoing as part of the open space assessment, where all the community organisations are being asked to comment on their individual needs. So it sort of can inform this when we get the results back from that.
Also, we are carrying out an audit of current leases, what we have, what are leased, what aren't leased. And as part of that process, when we talk to a club regarding the lease, we do try and draw out their views to see if there's anything we can add. So we've taken into consideration the points that they're putting to us, you know, and we've included in this policy.
Norma?
Yeah, I think it would be of great value to you if you sent a pro forma out, like a lot of tick boxes, so you could collate the same information, you know what I mean, from the clubs. Obviously leaving space for their own, replies, you know, what they think about it. But you could collate all that information then, you know, with the new policy.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Norma. We'll pick that up under recommendations. I don't know if you wanted to respond to that now, Andrew, but I think we can pick that up when we talk about recommendations. Yeah. We'll move on now to the items under support. Ron, do you want to ask the next one, please?
Thank you. If people take on leases and for any number of reasons it fails, what support mechanisms will be in place for the council to step in and support the community arrangements? And I'll give you one example there. We have a number of these halls that are supported by the council, that are funded, and if funding was ever withdrawn from them and they failed, what will happen?
Okay, so in terms of the community halls, as I mentioned earlier, we myself and another officer visit every month to make sure that they're kind of going along completing the correct premises management checks, to make sure that the building's safe and everyone's catered for and all the risks are mitigated. If anything within those processes, because we've already set out within what's expected on both parts, if anything isn't being completed or they're unsure of, then we adapt our visit frequencies accordingly to give them the support they require. So when we go there on a monthly basis, we go through all of the checks, make sure everything's up to date, go through any kind of queries or worries, and then at the end of the meeting we kind of give it a RAG rating in terms of red is there's some concerns in terms of some of the procedures they have to follow, amber is they're nearly there but not quite, and then green is it's okay, come back in another month. If any kind of flags up as a red, then we would make the meetings more frequently, kind of once a week, to make sure they're in the correct position to move forward.
What if they couldn't manage the hall? As I said, there are some that have funding from the council, and without that funding they would close, there's no question about it. So how would you support them without any fund, when they haven't got their funding?
So in relation to those which receive council funding, that's not for the management of the hall, it's for project-based activities relating to the areas of deprivation around them. So it's engaging with the community members as opposed to running the hall and operating it. It is purely for projects based on outcomes related to our corporate plan.
I don't think that my question's been answered. When there's no funding, how would you run? How would it be funded then? I mean, would they be expected to, again, projects to bring in money for themselves, lease hire the hall or whatever? I mean, I can see it going to happen that there are places out there that are funded and they're run by management committee, but without that funding, they won't succeed at all. So what would happen when they fail completely?
In terms of the funding received, it is for project based. It's not actually keeping the community halls open, because there's very few which have got based in a community setting which receive a grant as part of our grants programme. The majority don't receive funding from the council. They are managed and self-sufficient in terms of the revenue they gain from hiring the hall to community members, community groups. That kind of keeps them afloat. And in terms of any maintenance and repairs, it comes back to the council to keep the building open. So in terms of those who receive funding, if they don't meet their grant agreement, which is a separate entity, then that's dealt with through our third sector major grants in terms of reviewing the grant allocation to them. But in terms of managing the building and keeping it open, the removal of the grant wouldn't affect the operation of it. It would just be the projects.
Okay. Can I come in a minute, Ron?
Yeah, go on.
I don't want us to go down the route of reviewing third sector grants today.
It's not that.
But can I just ask a question?
Worries out there.
I'm picking up on the point you made, Ron.
Yeah.
Have we ever had one of these sports facilities or halls fail? Because we're asking hypothetical questions here. I just wonder, has it ever happened that, you know, it's gone pear-shaped?
Yes.
And you've had to deal with it?
In a nutshell, no. In my experience, we've had where committee members, so the overviewing committees or the premises managers haven't been performing the routine checks and health safety checks as kind of we would like, but then the support's been there to make sure they're understanding they've got the necessary skills and information to perform those going forward. Like I said, if there's something that's identified on a monthly visit that isn't kind of to kind of where we want it to be, then we can provide further support to make sure we can get to that level then. But in my experience, I haven't had a community hall where they've kind of failed on that agreement. And
that's reassuring, Ron.
I contradicted there. Yeah. So all the halls have been monitored over a monthly basis over the years, or is this just now you're doing it? I don't want to get too far into it because I'm sure David Daniels will know where I'm coming to in a minute.
The halls, in terms of operational and premises management, the halls have been visited monthly. I think it's from about August 2016. So through the process of around the year of 2016, we were implementing the management agreements to kind of formalise the agreement between us as landlords and property owners and the voluntary committees running the premises on our behalf. So once those management agreements were established, then we kind of go back every month then to meet with the premises manager.
Okay, if you go back from 16, I think you know where I'm going to come from. Kilbarn Hall. I mean, it was just one guy, one manager there managing it. No, wasn't leased out to anybody. There was nothing going on there. We were supporting it, and the support was withdrawn. But that went on for quite a few years, where this council was letting it go. You know,
Ron, I don't want to shut this down.
No, but that's
let me come in.
I'm trying to get back to
let me
checks
in a minute.
on a monthly
I know. Let me just come in. We're looking at the policy in the future.
Yeah.
I don't want to really go over the past. If
no, I'm not. But I know future I'm talking about.
And in terms of, you know, our role today is they've presented this policy to us, and we need to look at that. I don't want to get involved in detail about any of the specifics.
I'll be monitoring.
David?
Yeah, I mean, just to cap that off, I think it's probably exactly what Andrew said earlier, which is that the major grants covers what we were expecting to be delivered from Colbarn Farm. That's a completely separate pot of money, completely separate policy. So it not working on that level isn't necessary for discussion today. On a sort of property-based level, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I'm aware, they were adhering to the terms and conditions that we had in agreement with this. Well, yes, I mean, if you're talking about just managing and maintaining the building, and that, yeah.
I think we'll have a second conversation.
I'm more than happy to. But just to come back to your substantive question, which is around the viability, sustainability of halls, I actually think this is what I personally want to get out of this session today, because I think this is the pertinent question. This is the big question for community halls anyway, because I have concerns around the sustainability of the number of halls that we've got. If a hall does fail, I don't think we will have the capacity to run them all ourselves. So if we had multiple halls fail, I think we will find that difficult to manage. So we are heavily reliant on the community, and for those of us who are on community halls, and we're on several, and I've got several in my own ward, we know that the management committee of those aren't necessarily the turnover isn't necessarily quite frequent. So in order to maintain that expertise and that capacity to continue managing the halls, we're going to have to figure something out, really, because at the moment, like I said, I do have concerns because the uptake for the use of halls is steady. From evidence that Andrew might be able to feed into, we do have people wanting to use the halls, so there is definitely a demand for them. But in terms of keeping them going, that is the big question. So, it is obviously ultimately for the scrutiny committee to come up with a... Yeah, absolutely. But, from my perspective, because, I can't comment on a lot of what's been said already, but this is why I've jumped in, because this is the big question in my area. So,
I know some of David's areas, I know some of the smaller halls there, and there's been management committees there for forever. Then when it comes to they have to actually run it themselves, then they get a bit frightened. Then it's daunting. I mean, we've had people come from halls up to our village hall up in Hentless, and because, as Peter knows, it's so well run, and we're a bit of a flagship for people to come and we give them advice on how we run it as well. Some of the smaller halls out there, it really is daunting for them what they've got to do, and with the health and safety risks, and then people, they start dropping off then, don't they?
Yeah. No, and Ron, I fully appreciate Ron's got a lot of expertise, and I totally agree with you about Hentless Village Hall, but I'm going to try and avoid ward issues, but I totally agree. No, Ron, you're absolutely spot on.
Right, question number 2 under support. What support is given on how leaseholders should arrange maintenance and groundworks and who they can use to carry out these tasks?
Perhaps we do the sports pitches first. They can use whoever they want to undertake maintenance, and that's for the clubs to determine. Now, in terms of what support we provide, I think this is something that can be improved in the future. And looking back over the past, I don't know how much support has actually been given, and this led to the question about ensuring compliance with our biodiversity duty, because, for instance, these groups might, without, for no reason, of no cause of themselves, not realise some of the legislation. They may be cutting the hedges at the wrong time of year, so they do need support from us, and we'd like in the future for it to be as part of the policy that we provide that support and advise groups on how they should manage their areas going forward.
I agree with that, Andrew. I mean, bird nesting season, whatever, and whatever pitch is, and they have to check TPOs as well. I mean, when somebody takes the lease on, I mean, you've got to sit in there straight away with the hedging. That shows that's not yours. TPOs on there, because I mean, with all goodwill, I mean, somebody might just come along, cut the tree down, and they're in big trouble then. You see, so as long as you, as your team, specify everything, and it's all in the lease agreements. We have seen the one lease agreement for one sports field. We'll have to maintain the hedges and everything, and it's their responsibility. But they have to know what they can do, when they can do it.
Stuart, can we bring you in on the very last question on the back page, because it's the same theme, and I'll pick another point up in a minute.
All right, okay.
No, it's just while we're on this subject, we might as well deal with that last question.
As landowner, the council has specific duties to comply with under the Environment Wales Act 2016. How do you assess the leaseholders are capable of protecting and enhancing biodiversity through appropriate land management?
I'm bringing that question in, Andrew, because we were talking about the duties and responsibilities you're going to improve, you said, and it's a similar theme, so we might as well... Yeah.
Why I was wanting to add something, because I've had conversations with both Andrews on this, and I maintain that if you're taking a hall on, or you're taking a piece of land on, it's the same question. Template, it's a very simple thing really, and I say it about Lockmanstone, when I think about it, and a template of where you're at with it and what's needed, compliances, policies, blah, blah, blah. And I think when we take on a hall, a condition of the hall, we need a surveyor or somebody similar. You do it, but you're administrative on that, aren't you? Not a surveyor. Land management, it needs, when they take it on, they need to know what they're taking on and what responsibilities. This is my chair of scrutiny, my particular area coming in there, they need to know what they are, and along with Fiona's equal opportunities and all the rest of it, and the ecology of biodiversity, because there's an absolute minefield in there. And I get former Borough Councillor Brooks, who's down in the Community Council, telling me, bearing in mind he is chair of all the soccer people in the borough, and he says, if you take these leases on, you're going to have an oak tree in the middle of your soccer pitch, and Pontedrin is a good example there. So there's a great oak tree in there, and how much do oak trees do they take to do? Well, it's a favourite one of ours, isn't it, Mark?
Right. So,
Yeah.
Before I hand back over to Andrew. Andrew, we've had this discussion when we were discussing tree policy, very similar sort of discussion. But we're still interested in your views, because we may be able to feed in a slightly different take this time.
Looking back over time, you have to bear in mind that the Council's policy of leasing facilities has been going on now for a number of years, several years perhaps. So we've got a legacy of things happening before the Environment Act came into being. So we're almost sort of backtracking in a way now, where a lot of clubs have actually got leases. It goes back to the question about the pros and cons, really, of this policy, because we may have to try and retrofit some of the existing leases by working in partnership with the clubs to, make amendments to the policies that they've got. So, the answer to the question is that the Act hasn't been incorporated in the leases prepared to date, because some of them were done before the Act came into being anyway. But it's something that I think we have the duty to do in the future.
No, did you want to come in then? No? I think we've answered all the questions now bar one on the back page. This one about...
The boundaries as well.
Oh, go on then. I thought we covered off the boundaries when we were talking about the... going back in the past, and there were different arrangements. But okay, we'll just pick it up. We'll pick it up. Are the leaseholders made aware of the boundaries and what they're responsible for within those boundaries before taking on the lease? I'll come back to that, Stuart.
Oh, I'll come back to it, but it's a rather pertinent one here.
Go on then. Sorry, Andrew. Stuart, come in.
Some of the halls, and this is a conversation I have had with both Andrews as well, some of the halls are getting to the point where they are absolutely not fit for purpose. And we've got to come to time, and Dave and I have had discussions on this, they're not fit for purpose. They're getting to the point where the council should consider doing away with them or doing something different with them. And I don't know what we say about that, because they're quite old, or what do we maintain? You had a problem with the big one we're on about, where there's central heating systems, and you had to spend a lot of money on it. Plus the fact that compliances for things like heating should be a lot more modern. They are. You've got that with a few of them now. I don't know where we go with that. We maybe need a recommendation on that, and we maybe need to either replace or shut down what. I don't know what we do with them. They could be used for other purposes. I know we've got lots of use on it as well, so we actually say that maintenance issue is a very, very big one.
We'll see if they want to make any comment on that.
Yeah, just to come in on the maintenance side. So in terms of maintenance from our point of view, if the hall are on a management agreement, then the local authority are responsible for all the repairs and maintenance. So if anything fails, then they contact us and we go out and we repair where we can. If it's not repairable, then we replace service in place there. If they're on a lease, it's a different thing, kind of managed through asset management. But if they're on a lease, then it's similar to what Andrew mentioned in terms of sports pitches. It's up to them. They can go to where they want to in terms of getting the best value for money for repairs and maintenance.
Yes. I think I just back Stuart on this one. I know exactly where we're coming from. There's somebody out there, and David will know them as well, but if they take it on a lease, they just haven't got the money. Some of the repairs could be major repairs there, and I think that's when the council should look at it and say to these people, well, we're not going to lease it to you because you've never afford to do it anyway, and is it fit for purpose? And I think that has to be looked at, exactly what Stuart said. And David will know some of the halls he's got as well. Are they fit for purpose? Do they comply with the central heating? Lots of repairs. You've got to look at it. You look at it straight away. You know what's going to happen there.
this feeds into the sustainability question that Ronnie was asking earlier, because I think it's absolutely part and parcel of it, because I think this is a very difficult question we're going to have to answer sooner or later. Is as well as the management and the sustainability of the day-to-day running of it, are the buildings fit for purpose? Are the buildings sustainable? Are we going to be able to continue? Are we delaying the inevitable with some of them? In that some of them may, the cost of bringing them up to standard would be so expensive. So it's a big question for the council to ask, I think, going forward, because I don't think that the current way we're doing things is sustainable. And the reason I'm so interested in the committee's views on this, and I don't know how you do this today, or whether you take this in the form of another scrutiny session on, say, council assets or something like that, all of our assets. But I'm particularly interested because the answer is not obvious, the answer is not an easy one, and it's not a forthcoming one, and in no direction is it going to be a simple one. So, I'd be very interested to hear the committee's views on it.
And exactly, I back David up on that one. This should be going to one of our recommendations, the sustainability of the halls, and the council should look at it, and again, bring it back again. It could be a hard decision. Well, we can't afford it. I mean, this is what it is about giving people who can't leave something to somebody that can't come up with the repairs, and this is a serious one to look at in the recommendation. Is it fit for purpose?
Okay. And we'll pick that up. We'll pick that up when we have discussed recommendations in a minute. I'm going to bring Stuart in first in case he's on the same point, Norman, then it'll be you, then Alan.
I have no trouble with that. I think Ron and I probably do that one afterwards. Okay. Right, Ron?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Norma?
Thank you, Chairman. You're saying about the sustainability of halls. Yeah. Some of them are in very bad disrepair. If there are independent halls in the same vicinity, would you consider, or the council, could they consider taking over those halls for the community? Because some of these independent halls, they're struggling financially. They're in need of help, and there is nowhere really for them to turn to, for help. Do you know what I mean? Because if an area hasn't got a hall at all, if there's an independent hall that could take that place, that's a facility that the community can use. Would the council consider doing anything like that?
I think it's a fair question, actually, because I think as part of this, if you were to take this further in a recommendation and another session, I think it would be worth looking at the borough as a whole and looking at not just the borough-owned halls, but all of the community halls, the church-owned halls, the community-owned halls, private-owned halls, because you want to know what assets you've got out there for the purposes that your community wants for them. In terms of taking over, I mean, that could be part of the solution in that if there was a hall in our ownership that wasn't fit for purpose, you could repurpose that hall and the land in order to be able to I don't know, finance maybe private. I mean, I don't know how the logistics of that would work out, but I'm just trying to figure out a way forward for that. Because I understand where you're coming from, because absolutely, I think, I think the best way to look at it is what does your community want? Are we able to deliver it? And basically going through the process of figuring out a way of delivering that. And again, it really does come back to the committee and the rest of the council really to pitch in with this, because I think this is going to be a very difficult thing, whichever direction we go in, because it's going to involve consulting with our communities and understanding what they want and communicating that this is something that is necessary to ultimately safeguard the assets that we've got and our communities as a whole.
Yeah. I mean, I like this idea of... I'm going to bring everyone in now, but I'll speak for a minute. Cheers, right. No, I like this idea of looking at the assets as a whole. I mean, Ron, in our ward, for example, and I don't want to get into ward specifics, we've got in Coker Avenue a Bronavon Hall, So we're not looking at the whole, really, are we, when we're looking just at the council premises? But I'll stop there now. It was... Alan.
Thank you, Chair. This one is out of ignorance, really, which is where most of my questions come from. Can you tell me, is there anything within the lease or the licence or the management agreements that we have that precludes these halls from looking elsewhere, because it's council property, looking elsewhere for resource, for finance, for grant? Are they limited in that?
No, there's nothing within the management agreements or leases in terms of them looking for additional monies to help sustainability of the hall. What the feedback is from the management committees is that as those are on management agreements, they can't actually apply for funding. They need to have a lease in place to be able to access funds.
Therefore, is there a way that we can change that gives them that kind of route? Yeah. Is that a possibility?
In terms of changing the management agreement, I don't think there are any changes to be made which will suffice the requirements from the funding organisation. So it's the funding organisations which they're applying for which have the restrictions on in terms of having a lease in place. So the bigger pots of money which some of the community halls have been going for, such as the big lottery, they require at least a lease with 10 years left in place so they can actually apply for those funds.
I understand that, but is there anything that stops us from making that change?
Probably need someone from assets in really to answer that question. So I don't know if this is something that that you can have outside of this meeting. You know, the question taken forward and get an answer. Because in all honesty, I mean, we can try and cobble something together, but you want an actual answer.
Make a note of that, and we'll follow that up with asset management, I think.
Can I say one of the problems that community councils have, certainly when I'm on, is they can't make a grant to the hall because it's a turbine asset, but they can if it's a project. That was one of the problems because it's double funding. So if it was not managed, if it's a private hall, they can do it easily, but because it's double public funding, it gets into the double funding laws. The other thing I was going to say briefly about the other conversation we're having, this could be, in terms of assets in a community, it's one of the things that place planning would address very easily, whether it's done by the borough or it's done by community councils. That place planning exercise would look at that issue very easily, I thought.
I'm a bit puzzled with what my colleagues said, because Pontypool Community Council give grants to community halls, whether they run by Torfaen or they're independent. They give them small grants every year towards their running costs. We haven't had any trouble with...
You've got a different system.
Oh, well, you want to go over to the system that we got in Pontypool?
No, I think we do. Look, but I was...
I don't want to get bogged down with community council procedures and policies here today. So I think you two can have a separate discussion outside this meeting. Right, we'll move on. We've got two more questions. I want to move on because I know when some of the officers has to leave and Ron's got to leave at 3 o'clock. I'll just touch on this. I thought it had been covered, but Kath tells me we've got to make sure we pick it up, so I will. Are the leaseholders made aware of their boundaries and what they're responsible for within those boundaries before taking on the lease? I'm just making sure we have covered that off. Andrew?
Yes, all this would be detailed in the lease agreement and the heads of terms.
Final question on the back page, and I'll ask it. Well, what procedures are in place to deal with sports fields that are gated to ensure that the public still have rights of way, the rights of way if available? Right, I'm aware of a sports field that we've had problems with the gated field. So,
my question with that, okay, is: are we talking about public rights of way, or just access for the public to a field? Because if it's public rights of way, then Mark would be able to respond.
We'll try to cover both, I think. If we can.
Try, yeah. Well, with a public right of way, sorry, then access has got to be allowed 24 hours. Oh, sorry.
No, you're all right. Andrew's your mic now?
No, they're both on this one.
I have 2 buttons.
That's fine.
Right. Yes, so if there's an identified public right of way, which is a legal right for the public to use a path or road or track, then the access has got to be maintained for the 24 hours, so it can't be shut off at any time. If it's a private access, or it's just an access to get to that field, then that will be down to the terms of the lease, and whether that will be needs to be remained kept open, or whether it needs to be shut at certain times during the day. And again, so it all depends what will be in the lease for the private access. Because we've got difficulties at the moment, because I know that there's issues with the PCPOs, which is the public spaces, the dog control orders. So there's issues around there as well. So they'd have to be considered as well with any access to the sports ground.
Yes, I do, thanks. There's one I referred to earlier. Given that we've got leases, licences and management agreements and across sports fields and community halls, what are the criteria to actually arrive at the fees we charge these various organisations? And how clear are those, is that process? How transparent is it? Or can we make it more transparent?
I'd let Andrew speak about community halls, but effectively there is no fee for leasing out the sports pitch. I think, you know, it's a nominal amount. As Councillor Cross said, of £1 or something like that. You know, the cost to the organisation is in the maintenance that they're liable for.
So, in terms of the community halls, if they're on a management agreement, there is no kind of monetary value to it in terms of rent or as there would be with a lease. It's just operational control of the building, so there is no charge whatsoever. In terms of the lease arrangements, that's something with asset management, but the ones we've got currently is there's 4 on the lease, and it's a peppercorn rent, so as with the sports fields, it's just £1 a year. But that's an asset management way of analysing revenue from the leases going forward if there's an additional charge.
As a lot of the community halls are one of the few large buildings we've got in any ward, a lot of them have big kitchens. They are the only large kitchens we have in most of the wards. How do we help out the committees with the scores and the doors routine? Because they tendency not to be up the top of the league as far as they're concerned. Is that a concern, and do we help them out? Because the equipment involved is quite expensive. I know that because some of them have got quite good community kitchens.
To be quite honest and frank, that is something which our environmental health officers go out and support with. So they do the inspections and they give them the recommendations and then support off of that then. As so far, I haven't had any dealings with any other kind of support for improving the kitchens or working in that way.
Come back on that because it's part of Dave's anti-poverty thing, and they are quite useful as distribution depots for some of that stuff, and obviously demonstration kitchens. There's a whole lot of issues could be in there, and it just strikes me that they've got issues with old buildings, and the inherent problem in old buildings is trying to get it up there, because that you do tendency not. I mean, I know issues once we've got.
Thank you. It's just to say that is it okay for me to get back to you on that one, because that is part of my portfolio. Food hygiene.
No, I thought it was yours, is it?
Yeah. Food hygiene is me.
Up on that. That would be
okay.
helpful.
Only one last question. With the community halls, how many are leased out?
We've got a list one.
Am I going to make glasses on top?
So yeah, we've got 19
Oh, I can see it now. Sorry, yeah.
So there's 4 out of the 19 on leases.
Oh, yeah, 4.
Okay.
I brought my glasses.
Okay. Have we got any further questions?
I was just going to say, in response to Stuart's question around the kitchens and whatnot, I think what you're doing there is you're fleshing out your next line of inquiry, which is what I was alluding to earlier, which is, I just think it's part of the wider picture of the sustainability, what the halls do, what they're for, are they delivering? So, that's my contribution, since you're asking, is that's a good line of inquiry.
Hey, David? From members of the committee. No. Before I let the officers go, I'm going to jump ahead slightly. We invite comments from members of the public, and we've only had one comment received on Facebook. So while I've got the officers and the executive members here, I'll share it. It's a little bit of a criticism, but we should listen to constructive feedback. So I'm going to read this one out. It's only the one. I have no problem with you leasing football pitches, but when asked you last year when you would cut the grass on it, I was told it was down to the leaseholder. Yes, they cut the pitch every other week, but the surrounding areas grew to nearly 2 foot high in places. As long as they cut it once a year, I was told that was deemed good enough. And it shows they maintained it. Not good enough. That then was also told it was good for the wildlife, the bees and the butterflies. Really, blah, blah, blah. If the clubs want it, they have to maintain all of it. Thoughts, please, Torfaen County Borough Council. Now, that's for us to consider, but I'm sharing that with you. That's one member of the public's view. And if the members of the public is watching, thank you. So
It hasn't got where it is.
I know Ron is anonymised. But I mean, we invite comments from the public, and we should take that into account. Okay, I'd like to thank the executive members and the officers for attending today, and thank you very much, and very constructive comments from you. We're now going to let you leave, and then we're going to consider and formulate our recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, now, Councillor Thomas had to leave because of an emergency in work, and I know Councillor Burnett has to leave fairly quickly, so we're going to have to move very rapidly into members' thoughts on recommendations. Now, I'm going to ask Kath here, because she's been copiously making notes of recommendations as we go along. Kath will talk us through some of the things that came up during the meeting, and then I'll invite members to make sure that we've covered everything off that they raised during the meeting. Okay, Kath?
Mm-hmm. Okay, members, as per always, I've made some notes as we've gone along. Some of these may well be things that you want to make as recommendations or not. Some may be merged. So I'll just go through for the time being. We can discuss and then we can put them forward as we go along. So the first area that I picked up on was when we were talking about levels of public liability insurance. For the sports halls, I believe they said that they ask for copies of their insurance, but then for community hall, sports grounds, community halls, they didn't. I don't know whether that's something that you want them to look at putting in as a recommendation to add to their monthly checks, so that once a year, on one of whatever their monthly visits, they say, well, we need to see a copy of your public liability insurance, and they keep a copy of it, or whether you don't think that's necessary.
I think there should be a consistent approach.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so I think we'll put that in.
On both.
Yeah, yeah.
Can't have one and not the other.
So I say when we had the joint meeting...
One at a time, Alan's first.
Yes, Chair, I wonder if we should ask for some consistency of the content in terms of those liability insurances. Because it's a pretty well-known fact now that most of these insurances are cutting down on some of the things they cover, the amounts they cover them for, to produce a lower price, which then seems more attractive to those coming in. So it's just to make sure that there's a minimum.
So what we're saying now really is the council should do a risk assessment and make sure there's consistency of approach.
Yes.
Yeah. Stuart?
Okay. The other thing I picked up, when we had a joint community councils meeting with them, they found out that some were paying about 3,000 and some were paying about 400 pounds for public liability, and some paying considerably more. What is also needed is an offer from the council to do it for them, because they really didn't know where they were. So there was not just a procurement exercise by the council to do it for them.
What about asking the council? What about asking the council to advise, Stuart?
Yeah,
advice-wise.
Be consistent. Risk assess, be consistent in approach, and advise.
Yeah,
yes.
that's sensible.
Okay.
Yes.
I would say with the clubs, because at the end of the day, they've got the best deal.
That's fine. Okay,
Yeah.
we've got that one. Kath, the next one when you're ready. Sorry. I'm glad I'm not doing the right thing.
Did you pick health and safety at the same time? Because I'm worried about that.
Hang on. Kath?
Okay. So we talked in detail about the equality side of things and about the criteria for the lists that are currently in place. So there's a demand for sports pitches and there's a waiting list. So you talked a lot about criteria and whether or not we'd want to promote or offer opportunities for the use of the facilities on an equal basis. So no priority given to males over females, but whether or not there would need to be a particular criteria that they could use, which is inclusive to all, so that those people who are putting their names down on the waiting list know what they potentially would be scored against. So then we talked, this is all sort of into one, so we'll put something together afterwards. Then we talked about junior teams, including both genders, with youngsters wanting to play football and rugby, whether they be boys or girls. Should there be a higher weighting in the criteria, which encourages youngsters to stay fit, which is part of our corporate plan, you know, trying to encourage that. And also then it could encourage those to continue into that level of fitness when they move forward into senior teams. But then Alan's point then came into taking into account that those children who are of school age already have options available to them for pitches and availability of sports, whereas perhaps older people of working age won't have that opportunity and that availability there. So I think overall, to pull that together, there needs to be a criteria that ensures that there is equality and inclusiveness of all those who apply for it. And is that what you would want to put down, rather than specify in different groups?
The one thing needs to be in there, which I did bring up at council yesterday, was abiding by our equality standards. Because one thing some of them notorious as is not doing that. They need to demonstrate that they by equality.
Yeah, how are we going to form it?
Is that about it?
Norma?
We've got lots of senior football clubs who combine junior with them, and without the senior ones, how can I say the juniors would not exist, because they really support them well financially and encourage them. And as we've got the Future Generations Wellbeing Act, I think we have to, how can I say, look favourably on these clubs that encourage junior teams, because a few of them have got 5, 6, 7 age groups. You know, they're doing so well, and it's a shame if these can't continue to go on. I know they've got sports fields, but I think the competitive teams outside school, I think that's good for children, as well as their school. Because I think the schools are cutting down a bit on sports facilities, which is a bad thing because of their curriculums.
So it sounds, I mean, we all want to encourage equality and diversity, but we've got to try and formulate this into a form of words that Stuart suggested that they have to abide by the council's equality.
What I'm trying to, if you look at all these sports leagues, they've got their own equality. Most of them have got, they have to get their money for they have to have their own equality things. They're all hot on it these days. Yeah.
I think, Chair, if we give priority to sides who demonstrate that they actually have equality as part of their policy, and also against those who run a number of teams across there. And,
I think that would meet the... Is that all right, Kat? Good. Thank you, Alan.
Could you go back to the health and safety bit? Because I'm not happy because I've had some issues. Sorry. I've had some issues around that, and I think that needs to be demonstrated across both the sports pitches and the halls. And we need, as a council, to make sure that our standards of health and safety are maintained across all of them. Simple as that.
Can I come in there, Chair? It might encompass something that I wanted to say in terms of this. I was a little bit worried about the answer in relation to looking at other local authorities and what they do. I thought it was a little bit, well, we meet them and do the rest of it. And I wonder whether she'd ask them to specifically go back and talk to other local authorities to see what their policies and procedures are in this area, and specifically in relation to health and safety as well, and see how they cover that.
Well, the reason I say this is if you go to WCVA website, and you go to the other one, which is the Association of Community Centres. They've got perfectly good health and safety procedures. They work very well for community halls. I know because I've been there. And it seems if we've got that sat there, they would work very well for voluntary management committees. And it doesn't even need to do the work on it. And in the past, when I've been to the community halls in Cardiff, they all abide by the National Association, whichever, the WCBA or whatever, one of those. It doesn't need to reinvent it because a council one is not appropriate for a community hall.
I'm just trying to formulate a formal words here. Kath's busily writing.
You need something appropriate for community halls that can stand.
Kath? What Kath's got to say.
All I've got down at the moment is consultation should take place with other local authorities to see what could be learnt from their best practice, especially linked to health and safety.
Appropriate to people running community halls and sports pitches. What it is not is council type things. Because if you go out, there are two bodies I'm thinking of. One is the Welsh Council for Voluntary Action, which is what this council is suggesting TVA got in on this act. The other is community centres, which they are in fact very similar to.
I'll tell you what we'll do, Stuart, to get around this. We'll just add with other local authorities and the WCVA. All right, and that'll get. All right, so if you just add that, Kath, and that'll deal with that. So, yeah, that's fine.
You know, I suggested they send out a pro forma because they haven't actually consulted with the sports people or the halls. It would have to be a separate one, obviously, for the halls and the sports ring. I mean, if it's a pro forma with tick boxes, they're more likely to send that back. And then they could collate that information easier. But obviously, they need a space for them to put down the views of each organisation as well.
No, I'm looking over my shoulder. I can see Kath's got that written down. Kath? Just give Kath a minute.
Yes, yeah. The boundaries, I'm very keen that they specifically, you know, outline the boundaries, especially of the sports pitches, and what they're exactly responsible for.
Exactly, yeah.
They just came back and said that they do that.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
I mean, the problem with that, Norma, is, as Andrew said, a lot of these leases go back pre the 2016 Act, and not that that Act's anything to do with boundaries, but, you know, they can't fix what leases were given, you know, previously. They can only do that in the future.
Right.
They need to go back and renew them.
Yeah, well, yeah,
You know, they have to update it.
Okay.
But I know for a fact that some of these sports organisations have shocks. They are liable for trees that don't even border their boundaries.
So what we can say then is when things come up for when new ones are granted or things come up for renewal, the issue on the boundaries are clearly spelt out.
But it's not just the boundaries, it's condition survey as well. Because if you've got a building or you've got a pitch, you need to know what condition it's in, what you're responsible for. The tree in the middle of Pontypridd Fields, as an example, and back to our lot, you know. Yeah. It's a little bit more than...
Yeah, no, it is, Stuart, and we were asking questions about maintenance and groundwork, so... Yeah, so it's picking all that up, isn't it, really?
It's boundaries and conditions. And with community halls, by the way, you put the word curtilage in, because you also respond... You need to put the word curtilage in, because as I think you've been on community halls, haven't you? And you're responsible for all the trees that sit around the perishing thing as well. And that can be quite expensive.
Yeah, it is.
Kath, what are we going to suggest there? We just make sure there's a form words the committee members are content with.
Okay. Reinforce the requirement to provide clubs and sports grounds with details showing clear boundaries and conditions and their responsibilities in relation to them.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Kath?
Yeah.
Yes? Hang on.
Okay. So we were told that clubs can use anyone that they want to carry out the maintenance, but Andrew clearly said that going forward he thinks more support could be given to them on that. And then we talked about the possibility of a template that clearly shows what their responsibilities are and who they can go to for help in relation to different things. So who they would go to or where they would get advice from if they were looking to do something that could impact on, say, the Environment Wales Act, who they could go to if they were looking to get advice on internal maintenance, but it's to ensure that they're not doing things or getting people in to help that are not the right people to do the right jobs.
The grounds maintenance for clubs, that anybody can. If you've got buildings, the council is responsible for it. It's not anybody on buildings. The council still does that.
Yeah, in relation, that they give you the legal basis of management agreement, lease or licensing. So whichever ones of those are responsible, for each one, they have a template that lists exactly in a tabular format that shows exactly what it is that they're responsible for, where their advice can be sought from, and what acts that they're dealing with.
We refused to sign the lease of Mount Pleasant Hall. I'll give you an example of this. We're still running it, but we've not got a licence for it. Okay. It's one of those arrangements.
All right, we'll go back to Kath now. Alan?
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if Casca is covered, but I just felt in relation to charges and fees, it was about as clear as mud, a pound for this or a pound for this or a peppercorn for that. I mean, I don't see why there can't be clarity for everyone concerned about what gets charged. Because, for instance, if I've got a field in New Inn that's rugby or football, am I paying the same as Pontypool Rugby Club or Pontydrin Fields or wherever, the same with the Village Hall, Lisbon Teg Village Hall, paying the same in the north, paying the same as Pontier in the south, or not? And if not, why not? It's just everybody to see, this is how I'm charged, I understand it, and it's a fair way of carrying on business. And I know there are some differences within some of those, but there must be a set of criteria to use so that everybody understands it and that it's fair and open.
So I think what you're saying there, I'll just paraphrase, we're saying as part of this new policy, there should be a clear and defined charging policy set out.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that.
Is that okay? Something like that, Kath? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Most of these clubs do their own maintenance or contract people to do their own maintenance.
They do it themselves, yeah.
So the council don't do much of that.
I think really, there's nothing to do with the maintenance or anything else. It's just the fees that we charge. If I want to go and rent that hall or that field, how are you going to charge me? Are you charging me the same as somebody else? I think there's issues around maintenance will differ anyway across those areas because if you've got central heating working or not and so on.
But charges for halls is usually down to the management committee what they charge, not the council.
It was in the past.
What happens in terms of if it's a lease or a management agreement? Maybe he was talking about £1 rent for some of them.
Which is in the report.
We're just saying, is there a consistent approach to that?
No, what I'm thinking of, if somebody wants to hire a hall, that's, the management committee.
Sorry, Norm, I wasn't referring to those. That's the management committee to do in each individual one. They have their own policies there. It's a transaction between the halls or the sports fields and TCBC.
Issues here. One is the arrangement between the borough and the management committee. The other is the arrangement between a hiree and that's actually uniform.
Yeah.
That arrangement is actually uniform because you get a hire sheet and I can get a hire sheet on every hall in the borough. That's already there.
Can I ask a question? Do all community councils meet in community halls?
No. We've got our own building.
And if not, why not?
We have our own buildings.
Well, Cumbrian Community Council has its own building. Pontypool Community Council has its own building. Hentless Community Council meets in Hentless Village Hall. No, I know there's 3. I'm not sure what the arrangements are. Is it Llanrafon?
No, well, my question is why don't we do community halls then and free up all this other property for different groups somewhere else?
It would be absolutely impossible.
Yeah.
Pontypool, we've got quite a number of staff. They have to work from somewhere. Yeah. I mean, we haven't got a proper chamber. We've just got a room that we use as it. And if you'd like to come and see what we do there, you're very welcome. No, you'd see that it would be impossible
wait a minute. I don't want us to get bogged down in community halls. It's not part of this. That's not part of this remit.
Can I just give you one very simple bit of history about Cwmbran? Cwmbran Community Halls were part of a community college network at one time. And I'd like to see it go back to it because I said we have this thing that they actually are in all our areas, and I'd like to see that back again because, in essence, they should be hubs of our community. Some of them are, and some of them aren't. That was the aim of it when the Development Corporation was set up.
I don't think it's part of the remit today, Stu.
No, it's not. No, but there is that view amongst members of the public that they serve each community.
Yeah, that's fine, but I want to stick to what we're trying to deal with now.
That is an important part of what they're there for.
Yeah, and we may pick that up there's a wider question about looking at all the assets in the borough, wider than just, but we can deal with that.
Built on that principle. I'm sorry, I will make this wider point because if you go to every new town, they all have the same template. And one of the points about new towns, and Cardiff had the same principle, funnily enough, community tutors in community, the idea of the community college, and that's how Cwmbran was built.
More recommendations on your list, Kath?
Rather than the rest of the borough.
Right, to come back.
Okay, 2 more things to cover then. Councillor Daniels was talking about, and as was Councillor Ashley, community halls not being fit for purpose, concerns about the sustainability of them. That could, depending on the AGM and how different exec member portfolios are split, not necessarily sit under this committee next year after May. We don't know that. But you could put a comment forward to consider going forward that could be a possible item for a future visioning session that could be discussed under whichever committee.
Could I just do the germ of that one, please, very quickly? I can probably do 2 lines on it. Mount Pleasant Hall was built in is 50 years old. It's basically a very large shed made of timber. It requires a lot of maintenance. They just put brand new central heating boiler in there. It's a brand new second-hand one. It's a very old building. It needs a lot of maintenance. It sits on an old miners' welfare site, which as does the Park and Ashley House. And it's not far off being time expired. It's the biggest single building, biggest single community building in Cwmbran. It takes 360 people there, and as such, it's going to be requiring a lot more maintenance. So that's actually what we were talking about. Woodland Road is the next one, which is 300. So we've got a building there that we seriously needs to be looking at, because it's basically just wood, and it's got a chipboard ceiling.
So I'm still not clear what we're going to say about this in terms
of... basically, you need to look at mend and repair.
So I've just put possibility of a further session on the sustainability of halls, the use of independent halls, what the community require, can we deliver it, and how we safeguard our assets. So, putting something together, back in the summer now when we start looking at visioning for the future, depending on what committee that all of that portfolio information sits under, there could be something that you might want to put forward as a comment for the Chief Officer and the Exec Member to consider when they take items to visioning in the summer.
Okay.
I agree with that, Chair. I'm just wondering, just trying to make sure we don't lose the point about whether or not there's something we can do within this policy to give some of those halls flexibility to look for money elsewhere, in terms of changing that management agreement, whether it's to a lease or to something else. Because if they stuck then, they can go to other places to find funds, and that's constraining them, isn't it? If sustainability is a problem, it's whether or not they can find a mechanism to release that so they can go and look elsewhere to help with their sustainability. Because there are various people out there who are making grants. You see, very often you see some to a church somewhere that's got it, not from a church grant authority, but from somewhere else. And they can go and get, hundreds of thousands of pounds sometimes to totally redo what they are doing. And some churches as well, get them from within the church authorities, I know, but there are lots where they go outside because they've got that freedom, whereas these halls don't appear to have the freedom to go and do something that could benefit them, the community, and Torfaen Borough Council. And it's, I see it, and from the answer I got, it's because they're constrained from doing so because they're in agreement with us. Yeah. There must be some way, somewhere to change that.
Can I separate? Can we ask? Let me come in first to it. Can we ask, in terms of that, Alan? Can we ask? Can the executive members explore what flexibilities could be introduced to enable these halls to access funds? Something along those lines. I think that's the it's trying to make the point, and they'll have to come back then and say, they'll tell us what the legal position is and what flexibilities there are, I think.
Yes, I mean, if they develop this policy, it can give us the scope to actually improve the situation quite a bit, can't it?
Yeah. Just say, because the council owns the land, and they own it, they are barred from 99% of all grants.
The other aspect of it, which I have said about... Sorry, can I...
Sorry, there is my point, and that's why I want to say, can they explore other possibilities that can change that?
Well, we can ask the question. I mean, that's why I said they'll come back with a legal position. No, we're asking them to explore. I mean, if they come back, we'll, as a committee, look at their response and see if we're satisfied with it or not.
So, can I just say, there's two aspects to this. One, I've said about the Cwmbran ones and some of the ones at the Valley. They've sold the school up there to look at as an art hub. Now, the point about some of the communities in Cwmbran especially, we're now looking at the concept of community hubs. And taking the library thing, and I also brought the charity locality in for that reason. If you start talking about community commons, community hubs, you get into a very different concept, because it's the activity you do out of the building, not the building. You then get the money in for it. Very similar to what you do with the Leisure Trust. And the other point about Pontnewydd Mount Pleasant Hall, that building is built on an old miners' welfare. It is the one hall they could actually do something with, because it technically is a charity.
Well, that was exactly the point, Chair. That's exactly what's been done with the Leisure Trust. Yeah. Still council property. The Leisure Trust lease it from the council, but the Leisure Trust is a registered charity. So there are ways that you can move around that, because the trust can go anywhere it wants to for grants. You're not always forthcoming.
No, we can. I mean, if we just ask a generic question about flexibility and put an EG in there, for example, what the Leisure Trust do, just as an EG, and we'll see what they say. No, I mean, if they say 90% no, but we're only asking the question.
But you see, with Mount Pleasant Hall, the park and the sea cadets are all part of 1935 miners' welfare, and we still are.
I think we've got a generic question there. Are there any others, Kath?
No, nothing else from me. Just to run through the scrutiny activity, I think you're probably able to answer each of those questions now. So the first question is, does the review of the existing leasing arrangements reflect the current position? Well, it does, that they're ad hoc arrangements, and that's why they're suggesting that things are changed. The second question, do members agree that a policy on the leasing of community facilities is necessary? I'm assuming your answer is yes, since we're going forward suggesting things that they add to it. Does the draft policy and procedures cover everything required, and if not, what needs to be added? Well, here's a list of recommendations. Members are asked to consider whether the Council should consider the allocation of short-term licences rather than the long-term leases where appropriate, as a way of providing for the needs of a wider range of groups, which leads us to the equalities part, which we've said that there needs to be criteria and we need to adhere to the Council's quality policy. So from there they can draw the answer to that. Can I just say one last one? Where existing leases and licences are in place, are members happy that proposals to work with the organisations to amend them? So that's the one where those people who are currently using those facilities, there is no policy, but officers will now go back to them and they'll put something in place that suits them.
One issue I would like to which is the sustainability. The sustainability we talked about, access is the other one, because I did think that came up quite a bit, about not shutting down access. We asked the questions on it, and I think officers were well aware of that. Certainly where it was access for, not shutting down space, green space, it's rather important.
We did ask a question on gated sports.
I think we made. I'm very loathed to actually shut down. We've got clubs where they shut down the green space and it's not used. And I think the way we looked at it in terms of equality, and when we looked at it in terms of biodiversity as well, we would make sure we put that one down there.
Kath, can you just go back to the equality recommendation? And wait a minute, let's just see what we said there, just as a reminder.
Waiting lists need to adhere to the Council's equality policy to ensure that they're inclusive. Therefore, criteria to be introduced, which is clear and transparent, to demonstrate equality. And then I've got for more than one team, so where we'd say that if there are teams that have more than one team, like you said, like a number of age groups and whatever. But I hadn't developed that yet, because obviously
can we just add, Kath, can we just add and access, equality and access? Well, we just that if we say no, if we say access, that's broadly picking up that point. Equality and and without just going into, I don't want a huge another recommendation. I think we've got enough recommendations there.
Can I just say, when I talked about the independent holds, Councillor David Daniels could see the point I was making.
You make a good point.
If one of the council halls, is in a very bad condition, and there's an independent hall in the same area that they could take over, I mean, that's helping the community.
Use some sources.
You know what I mean?
It's a good point, Norm, and I think at one stage we discussed doing an audit of all the halls that are available. Yes. And David Daniels seemed to be encouraging us on that point.
Yeah, that's in the thing for visioning for the next.
Yeah, so we're going to pick. We're going to pick that up. And
I think the place planning is actually in the LDP.
Yeah. I don't want to labour this, but we're picking that up under vision in May. Okay, so I think we've got quite a few recommendations out of that, so I think we've done rather well. And thank you for that. Right, we'll move on now. There's the next item on the agenda, which is, let me find my agenda. It's the item 6, update from the Task and Finish Group on the review of the proposed budget mitigation for Green Meadow Community Farm. Now, as you're aware, we have an additional report, which is an update report from the Task and Finish Group to update you on progress made so far on the review of the proposed budget mitigation for Green Meadow Farm, looking at options for implementation and defining a preferred service model for the future. Now, firstly, I would really like to thank particularly Alan, Ron Burnett, and the officers. We've had 5 meetings so far, and some of those meetings have been day-long meetings. We've met with officers, we've met with stakeholders. There's been a huge amount of effort gone in the last few weeks, and I'm really grateful for all the support particularly from Kath and from Lynn Williams, who's not here today. I don't want us to get involved in a detailed discussion today. The report gives you a clear flavour of where we're going with this. I'd also like to put on thanks the difficult discussions we've had with the staff at the farm, because this must be a tricky time for them when they can see the budget potentially being cut by, well, not potentially, there's a mitigation of 200,000. We'll be coming forward later this month with firm recommendations, and it'll be for this committee to agree or not agree those recommendations and put them forward to the executive member for consideration. So I don't want to open the debate today, if I can avoid it, in terms of discussions about where we are. The report is quite clear. we're trying to do a very thorough process in a very small window of time. It hasn't been easy. We're going to press on. I think we've got 2 more meetings and we'll be having a report ready very soon, Kath.
Yeah. There's 2 meetings next week for the Task and Finish group, and then there's a special meeting that's been put in the diary for Wednesday, the 27th of March, and that's when the Task and Finish group will share with the rest of the committee their formal recommendations for you to accept or not.
In discussions, I've tried to keep members informed of some of the things that have been going on, and the report does set out in quite a bit of detail. It's a public document of things we've been looking at. So I don't think it's going to be very fruitful today for us to have a detailed discussion. That's not in any way trying to shut down discussion, but we did promise at the start of this process that we would keep the group informed of what was going on. I would say that we're down to 3 members now. For various reasons, other members haven't been able to help, but Ron Burnett, Alan Williams and myself are the 3, and we will get this report done. So, any questions?
I'd just like to thank you for all the work you've put into it, and I look forward to the outcome, the recommendations.
It's a team effort between us and the officers, but we're doing the best we can. So I think I'll stop there. That's enough on that item. Alan, you happy with that?
Yes, thank you, Joe. I think the report covers it and you've covered it. Nothing more to say at this point, I think. Most of the work is in front of us, I think.
Yeah.
Right, so we'll move on to the close of the meeting. So I want to just chat to you now about the... we've already said what the next meeting is on the 27th of March, which will be the final report of the Task and Finish group on the future of the farm in terms of the mitigation. Then we've got another meeting on the Thursday, the 9th of May at 1:30. I'd like to remind you that when the basket of items was chosen during last year's visionary session, the next topic that we've got on the list is the creation of litter and a fly tipping strategy over 2019-20. So, yeah, do you want to come in, Kath?
There were a number of items still left in the basket from Visioning last year. On speaking to the Chief Officer, none of those 3 are ready yet to be considered. But over the last couple of months, in the part of the budget planning and the new service planning process, you'll be familiar with the terms now change activities, which are what you considered when you did the joint cross-cutting budget scrutiny. Rachel Jowett has come forward with a suggestion that it's been approved now that they're going to be working over the next year from April onwards on putting together a strategy on litter and fly tipping. Now, part of this came from the conversations that we had here when we looked at the waste strategy. And there was a lot of questioning around how litter is relating to waste and fly tipping and how it should all be merged into one. That isn't the case, but it was shown by members that there's a strong appetite to do a strategy on litter and fly tipping as a separate entity. What Rachel was suggesting is that we have a workshop format to look at what the current problems are and what you think as members would be the key things to be involved in that strategy going forward. They'll then do their usual, where they'll go away, they'll research, they'll put together a draft strategy, and then they'll bring it back to Cleaner sort of in the new, from September onwards, as part of one of the visioning items, and then you will scrutinise the actual strategy to make sure that the things that are included in there are the things that you as a committee have deemed to be the right things in that strategy. So it's feedback on that as to whether or not you think that's an option going forward for the 9th of May.
Just be clear then, Kath. The meeting then on the 9th of May, it won't be a standard committee meeting, it'll be a workshop.
Yeah, it'll be open to the public as usual, like a cross-cutting one would, but we'd look to hold it perhaps in one of the committee rooms. There would still be a formal report provided to you to say the reason behind it, the background as to why they think that should be right, and the ideas of the officers going forward as to what they think. And then between you, you would then work on how you would want that put together and whether there are any things that they haven't mentioned that you think should be included. But it would be more of an informal setting so that you could bounce ideas around, if you like, rather than, because you're not actually scrutinising the strategy because it's not in place yet, is you feeding into what you think would be included.
Happy with that?
When it comes to something like this, a workshop, wouldn't it be better as a joint scrutiny to have all members involved? Because to have it as a small, I mean, what? There have been 5 of us here today, 4.
I mean, it sits under cleaner, just as waste is something that covers all members of the council, but it sits under cleaner, and we'd have to have a reason for taking that as a separate one. I mean, it was unfortunate today as to why some of the members are not here. There's some reasons behind that. Hopefully, it would be a subject that would engage members in enough that they would make every effort to attend, and we'd have full capacity.
We could, no, but as part of that, I'm pretty sure we'd say there ought to be a members' seminar following on from that meeting, maybe, which would give. I mean, what I like about it is it's given. All right, it's only a small group, but it's given us a very early opportunity to feed in some of our thoughts, and we're a cross section of the political ballot, the parties, and we've got an independent member. I'm sure that if we get excited about this item, we could. One of the suggestions we could well make, and I'm sure a lot of members would potentially welcome a seminar, maybe. But I don't see any harm in us doing that, and we can have some opportunities maybe to widen it later.
Yeah.
Sorry, put my mic back on. Do we need to invite the executive member to the next meeting? Yes, no.
No,
to this.
The one in May.
The one in May, the think tank, if you like. Yeah.
I mean, it would be it would be a workshop session. I mean, you'd be bouncing ideas around. You'd give her food for thought. It's entirely up to you. It's not, it's not going to. We're not going to be scrutinising her as such.
My own view is, I prefer to have them here so they're getting face-to-face feedback of what we feel.
Yeah, I think, Chair, as long as it's a positive addition to that, so it's no, we can't do that at that stage, so we really look at it and maybe look outside the box and not, be, shall we say, take a judicial view of some of the comments we made. So if they're part of that combination of looking to develop it, then I think it's good that we have the executive member, isn't it?
Okay, we'll have the executive member. Hopefully in that spirit.
I don't think the other question.
One or two at that workshop.
Okay, Mike.
1 or 2 at the workshop. How many tables will we get up to in a workshop? But that's long.
One, I would think.
Right. I'd like to thank members. I know they're not they're here. Members, the independent member. I will keep promoting you, Alan. Officers. For attending and contributing to the meeting. I'm now going to close the meeting to the press and the public. And thank you very much.